Okay, so our next talk is on the ecological case for economic democracy by Dr. Bengi Akbulut. Uh, Bengi is an assistant professor at Concordia University, where she's in the Department of Geography, Planning, and Environment. She's been a longtime collaborator with our Economics for the Anthropocene Project and now the leadership for the Ecozoic Partnership. And she's at least from my perspective, has really provided some invaluable perspectives on the impacts of neoliberalism and the need to shift to a truly democratic economy. So I've learned a lot on that topic and look forward to hear her talk today. Thank you, Bengi.
Thank you for the invitation and the very flattering introduction. So the talk that I'm going to give today is actually based on a paper I co-authored with my colleague Fikret Adaman for a special issue in ecological economics that was co-edited by Katie. So it's kind of coming back to family, it feels like, giving this talk. So what I'm going to basically do today is to kind of try to build a case for economic democracy using the perspective of ecological economics. So what I'm going to try to argue is that that economic democracy is not only desirable and in itself, but it's actually what is required for sustainability. And in doing that, I will try to kind of use the perspective and the framework of ecological economics and what it tells us in terms of decision making. And I have two caveats before starting. I am admittedly using a very vague definition of economic democracy as kind of a working definition, if you will, as the effective participation of all stakeholders in the making of a decision that affects them. And then towards the end of my talk, I will try to kind of give examples and operationalize this definition of it with concrete kind of ways in which economic democracy might be kind of realized to varying extents. And the second one is there's always kind of this, I feel this kind of controversial, I feel it's controversial to actually make a case for democracy, whether it's economic or whatever. I think democracy is in itself something that we should be arguing for and advocating. So even if it's, so I kind of feel a little conflicted to say that we have to defend democracy. But that aside, I'm going to start my talk. Okay, so there are a few kind of, if you will, some of them pre-analytical kind of features of the pre-analytical vision of ecological economics, or its kind of features of how it sees the world, the individuals, the relationship with the economy and the environment that I want to highlight. And then I'm going to kind of draw implications of these kind of features for decision making. So first of all, ecological economics builds on the recognition that uncertainty, complexity, ignorance, and uncertainty mark our relationship with the environment. So what it means, as you all know, that we don't know many things, we don't know most things, and we don't even know we don't know most things, especially about the future. So what it kind of implies in terms of especially market prices is that market prices cannot reflect every aspect of the costs and benefits, especially regarding the environment. So individuals' valuations and their expression of their preferences through prices, through their willingness to pay, can never, by nature, actually take into account every possible cost and benefit that is associated with that with that decision. The second kind of, again, very fundamental kind of pillar of ecological economics is that the environment is not any other commodity, especially in any other good, especially in the fact that it is marked with social and physical interdependence. And interdependence, kind of shortly put, basically implies that what I choose to do with the environment has a direct impact on what you can choose to do with the environment. And again, in terms of decision making, what interdependency implies is that atomistic decision making, so individual atomistic decision making without social interaction, without being in a social collective process, for instance, the kind of decision making within markets does not allow revealing how private decisions would affect humans and non-humans currently and the future. So the market process basically does not reveal information about the interdependent implications of our individual decisions. So these two things together basically kind of make a strong case against the market and market mimicking mechanisms of making environmental decisions. So either kind of environmental markets or market mimicking mechanisms, I mean kind of basically monetary valuation methods such as contingent valuation, which ask basically individuals what they're willing to pay or what they're willing to accept for the environment. So but I'll come back to that in a minute, but just that these two features, these two pillars already kind of make a case against using markets in making environmental decisions. The third point, economic incommensurability, or sometimes called value incommensurability, is again a fundamental feature, a fundamental kind of pillar of ecological economics. And what this means is basically that market prices are not a relevant measure of value. Even when markets do not fail and even when markets function perfectly, there is actually no common denominator, no single denominator that all values attributed to the environment can be aggregated across, can be reduced to. So, so this is not only kind of for prices, for any kind of single common denominator would be inadequate in capturing all the values that are attributed to nature, to the environment, but especially in terms of market pricing, market prices. So market prices can at best capture a subset of values attributed to the environment. So as you can probably guess, again, this is a kind of a strong attack, stab at imputed prices for environmental goods and services. So monetary valuation of the environment. But I mean, this notion of incommensurability actually goes back a while that I'm not going to actually today go into a lot of detail, but this is not a novel concept. This is a concept that has been actually kind of within the history of economic thought, especially within the socialist calculation debate and the work of Otto Neurath, who had argued for and who had kind of argued for the use of multiple, plural, not necessarily price-based, but plural indicators in order to weigh the pros and cons of any kind of economic decisions. But building on economic incommensurability, this notion, ecological economists basically argue that when we're making a decision that has implications on the environment, we should not only use price indicators, but we should use a plurality of indicators that are associated with multiple aspects of that decision. So it's basically a strong criticism of the cost-benefit analysis. And the last point is that it's kind of, I think it's, it in a way ties with Joe's kind of presentation as well, is that individual values, individual preferences are not given, but they're articulated. So they're not exogenous, but they're very much endogenous to the context in which decisions are made. So institutions, according to ecological economists, are actually not only fora that values are expressed, but they articulate values. So, for instance, markets encourage kind of self-interested behavior and atomistic decision-making through atomistic decision-making and discourage cooperation. But markets are also kind of, in a way, they provide frames through which environment is seen. So making decisions through markets are not only kind of inadequate, but they also kind of, in part, co-produce subjects that are self-interested because they encourage this kind of self-interested behavior. Okay, so what does ecological economics instead argue for? especially in the context of, and many of these things that I've described have been articulated and discussed in the context of making environmental decisions. But I will basically argue that this argument can be expanded and can be applied to economic decision making more broadly. But ecological economics basically says that we need to have deliberative social democratic processes of decision making that would be adequate, or that would be suitable to revealing interdependencies through reasoned dialogues and deliberation, where the uncertainties and the unknowns about the future could be weighed against the demands and interests of differently situated stakeholders. Such a process would also allow the collective determination of environmental values through a deliberative process, and a revision of values and preferences through reasoned dialogue, so people can actually become other people, can actually learn and alter their preferences and values. And also such a process could be more open than a market process, for instance, of a comparison of multiple dimensions of alternatives by non-price indicators, building on the economic incommensurability part. So as I just said, basically these have been discussed in the case of making environmental decisions, or kind of these ideas have remained confined to the making of environmental decisions, narrowly defined. But all economic decisions basically have a biophysical environmental implication, has a biophysical kind of root. So what I'm arguing is that these ideas that are coming from ecological economics can be made, actually can apply and apply strongly to the making of economic decisions within our current systems that are pretty much kind of atomistic and privatized. So the first case I want to kind of lay out here is decision making through markets. So markets are actually methods of making decisions, a decentralized method of making decisions about allocation of, first and foremost, allocation of productive capacity. So when we express preferences through markets, through our demand behavior, and then when producers express their production through their supply behavior, we're actually, as a society at an aggregate level, we're making a decision about how to allocate our productive capacity, quote unquote, to different ends. And how markets do it is through price signals, basically. But applying the insights of ecological economics to this process, basically market prices, we know that market prices cannot reflect every intertemporal aspect of the costs and benefits of that decision, of that allocation decision, due to complexity, uncertainty, and ignorance. And they can at best capture a subset of the costs and benefits that is associated with a particular good, with a particular commodity, because of economic incommensurability. They shadow the broader implications, especially ecological implications of private decisions of production and consumption, because of interdependencies. And they perpetuate and reward individual rationality rather than social rationality, and kind of perpetuate, again, a reductionist view of the environment, encourage self-interested behavior. Anthropologists of markets have kind of studied this last point, especially in some extent. So basically markets, not only environmental markets, or not only market mimicking mechanisms of environmental decision making, but markets as more broadly as a method of decision making, is not suited to deal with the challenges of sustainability in making decisions on how to allocate our productive capacity as a society. So what could be an alternative? I don't have a blueprint. I think I wouldn't want to have a blueprint, but I'm going to kind of just point out two things, or two kind of alternative ways we can think, or two ways we can think of as an alternative to the markets. One of them is participatory democratic planning. So this is not centralized planning. Don't think of the Soviets, but there's actually a huge kind of literature within economics on democratic planning, participatory democratic planning, is just more of a kind of a nested system in which stakeholders that are affected by the decisions are able to participate in the making of those decisions. So participatory planning is basically, it's kind of a process of negotiated coordination among stakeholders, as I said, at different levels. So you can think of kind of worker councils, but also producer councils, kind of assemblies and participatory fora that is actually organized at multiple scales that replace the market mechanism of decisions, of decision making on how to allocate productive capacity with basically a participatory process where people deliberate on the pros and cons of certain alternative types of action or alternative ends to which productive capacity can be allocated. A second alternative market mechanism that I often kind of think of in this context is kind of direct decision-making between organized producers and organized consumers, such as community-supported agriculture. I'm sure there are many among us who can say a lot more about CSA schemes, but basically, broadly conceived, what a community-supported agriculture basically does is to bring together producers and consumers in making decisions about what to produce, how much to produce, and how to price them. Rather than leaving these decisions to the market, there's two organized groups that are making decisions by deliberation. And that process itself is very much enabling some of the things, both participatory democratic planning, also kind of more localized examples of alternatives to the market like CSA. The process itself is enabling dealing with some of the issues that I highlighted that come from the ecological economics perspective. So for instance, social and ecological consequences of alternatives can be debated and weighed by stakeholders. So uncertainty, complexity, interdependency can be dealt with that kind of deliberative process of decision making, very much like the processes of decision making that ecological economics advocate in the making of environmental decisions. Equally importantly, broader concerns such as ecosystem health, biophysical limits, or social equity can come in and can kind of become more prevalent in the decisions about how to allocate productive capacity, where to invest, and how much to produce and what to produce. So that's kind of one way in which we can think of alternatives to the market. The second kind of family of decisions or forum of decision making or context of decision making I want to highlight is the capitalist firm, which is kind of the norm, the dominant form of decision making about production, basically. So how production decisions are at the level of the firm are made today prevalently, dominantly in our societies is privatized. So capitalist firm basically, again, there are different forms of capitalist firms that might have a kind of varying extents of private decision making, but capitalist firm exemplifies private decision making on what and how much to produce and what to do with the surplus. So where do we invest, or do we invest surplus and profits? Again, this is a private atomistic decision-making process. If we are to make a case, an analogy with the market, it's a private atomistic decision-making process that cannot deal with the intertemporal implications of the privately made decisions, cannot account for the broader implications of the private decisions of the firm. And again, it perpetuates and rewards self-interest and pursuit of profit. And to kind of what we can think of as an alternative to the capitalist enterprise, there's a lot of forms there too. One kind of straightforward example is cooperatives, where sometimes the productive capacity is democratically owned, but by definition, cooperatives are basically, they exemplify the democratic decision-making by workers on key decisions such as what to produce, how much to produce, and what to do with the surplus. Again, I don't want to idealize cooperatives, but kind of think of them as a working proposal to the extent that cooperatives open that decision making to participation participation and democratic involvement by a wider base of stakeholders. Broader range of demands, basically, and values can inform decisions. And goals other than profit maximization, such as ensuring sustainability or equitable livelihoods, regeneration and renewal of environmental quality, etc., can come into the play. Again, because it's a participatory deliberative process of decision making, such processes are better suited with dealing with the interdependencies and the complexity and ignorance and uncertainties that is associated with economic decisions. One example that we can think of, I think, is interesting to think of in this context is the Solidarity Cooperative Forum that is pretty specific to Quebec, which brings together worker members, client or consumer members, and community members. So it's like the widest, in a way, selection of stakeholders that would be making decisions together. So I'm going to end here. I have no idea how I'm doing in terms of time. I hope we can discuss more in terms of how to realize and implement a vision of economic democratization. So I'm looking forward to the questions.